You think control is the cure, that if you just organize more, plan better, or try harder to keep everything in line, your anxiety will finally shut up. But what if I told you that very instinct is the reason you're still trapped? Sigmund Freud believed that anxiety isn't just a response, it's a disguise. A psychological costume we wear to hide the unconscious chaos we refuse to face. The more we try to control the outer world, the more our inner world screams to be noticed. Here's the disturbing twist. Some people spend their entire lives trying to outsmart their anxiety, never realizing that every checklist, every overreaction, every attempt to control is actually feeding the beast. And by the time they notice, they've already built a prison made of safety and called it peace. So the question is, what are you really running from? And what happens when the thing you fear the most is yourself? Let's start with a simple question. When was the last time you felt truly in control? Think about it. That rare moment when everything seemed predictable, manageable, like life was finally obeying your rules. Now think about what happened next. Because if you're like most people, that moment didn't last long. Control is seductive, feels like safety, like armor. We obsess over it. We plan, prepare, overthink, and micromanage, not because we love structure, but because we're afraid of what happens without it. And here's the paradox. The more we try to control our lives, the more out of control we actually feel. This isn't just poetic irony. It's neuroscience and psychology colliding in a slow-motion car crash inside your head. Let's break it down. Your brain is wired for survival, not happiness. The amygdala, your brain's fear center, is constantly scanning for threats. It doesn't care if you're in danger or just worried your boss didn't like your email. It reacts the same way. Tension, adrenaline, cortisol. Now, when you start to feel anxiety, your brain doesn't ask why. It just wants it gone. And the fastest way to feel less anxious? Control something. Anything. Clean the kitchen. Recheck that text. Rewrite your schedule for the 4th time today. And here's where the trap begins. You get a small hit of relief. Feels like it worked. Your heart slows down. You can breathe again. Your brain rewards you. Good job. You controlled the chaos. But what you really did was teach your brain that anxiety equals danger, and control equals safety. So the next time anxiety shows up, your brain screams, "Quick! Find something to fix." It doesn't matter if it's logical. You'll scan for problems, even when there aren't any. You'll create problems just to have something to solve. That's how control becomes an addiction. Here's a chilling truth. Control is rarely about control. It's about fear. More specifically, fear of the unknown. Fear of powerlessness. Fear of losing your identity. And beneath that, often something deeper and more primal, fear of feeling. You don't want to feel grief, or shame, or anger, or abandonment. So you don't just try to avoid the emotion. You try to prevent the event that might cause the emotion. You don't just fear a breakup. You become hypervigilant in relationships. You don't just fear failure. You obsess over every detail in your work. You don't just fear judgment. You edit your personality in every social interaction. All of this in the name of staying in control. But here's the dark twist. Every time you try to eliminate discomfort, you eliminate your ability to tolerate it. Which means discomfort grows. Anxiety grows. Life shrinks. The comfort zone becomes a cage. Padded, predictable, suffocating. You stop doing things that might go wrong. You stop saying things that might offend. You stop trying things that might make you look foolish. And eventually you stop living and start managing. Let's bring Freud into this. Freud believed that anxiety wasn't just random. It was a signal from the unconscious mind that something inside us is unresolved. But instead of listening to that signal, we numb it. We silence it with habits of control and pretend we've fixed the problem. But we haven't. We've buried it. And buried anxiety doesn't die. It mutates. It becomes chronic muscle tension. It becomes overachievement. It becomes perfectionism. It becomes insomnia. It becomes rage. It becomes 100 little things you just do without realizing they're symptoms. Let's look at a real case. Take Julia, a 34-year-old project manager. On the surface, she was a high performer, never missed a deadline, always looked polished, and kept her apartment spotless. But behind closed doors, she was unraveling. She couldn't relax unless everything was just so. Her anxiety spiked over small things. A misplaced email, an unexpected visitor, a traffic jam. Therapy revealed something chilling. Julia's control habits began after her parents' chaotic divorce when she was 8. She learned early that predictability felt like safety, so she turned every corner of her life into a project to manage. But her anxiety never went away, it just changed shape. She didn't need better habits. She needed to grieve the chaos she never processed. And to do that, she had to give up the illusion of control. And that's the part no one tells you. Control feels strong, but it's often a form of psychological avoidance. True strength comes from discomfort tolerance, from knowing that life is unpredictable and choosing to live anyway. Here's what Freud might ask you. If your anxiety could speak, what would it say? What part of you are you trying so hard not to feel? What are you really afraid would happen if you let go? Because until you answer those questions, you'll keep reacting, keep controlling, keep spinning in the same loop, calling it self-care. So where do we go from here? You begin by noticing the moment you tighten, the moment your stomach clenches, the moment you need to fix something, say something, change something. Right now, ask yourself, is this about the situation or about my fear? Because once you start naming your patterns, you start reclaiming your power, not by controlling your anxiety, but by understanding it. And that's exactly what we'll dig into next. You've probably heard the phrase, it's all in your head. Most people dismiss it as a way to downplay emotions. But what if it's more literal than we think? Freud believed that much of what torments us mentally isn't what's happening in the world. It's what's happening inside us. An internal war, a battlefield we rarely visit consciously, yet one that controls how we think, react, and suffer. According to Freud, the human psyche is built like a layered machine, messy, emotional, and full of tension. At the top sits the ego, the part of you that tries to be rational, grounded, balanced. It's what you show to the world, your identity. Then there's the superego, a stern judge in your head, inherited from parents, society, religion. It's always whispering what's right, what's acceptable, what's proper. And then there's the ID. The ID is where things get primal. It's the source of raw desire, impulse, and instinct. It doesn't care about consequences, it just wants pleasure, power, sex, survival. And here's the terrifying truth. The ID never disappears. You don't grow out of it. You just get better at pretending you're above it. But it's still there, lurking. Now imagine the structure inside you. Ego, superego, ID, all pulling in different directions. The ID says, scream, demand, take. The superego says, be good, stay polite, don't embarrass yourself.
And the ego?
It's caught in the middle, trying to manage the chaos and make you look functional in public. This conflict is constant, and it generates tension. Freud called this tension neurotic anxiety, the fear that something forbidden or unacceptable might slip out. A sudden anger, an inappropriate thought, a breakdown in front of your coworkers. So what do? We don't face the conflict. We suppress it. We deny it. We hide it so deeply we forget it was ever there. And this is where defense mechanisms are born. Defense mechanisms are not just psychological tools, they're weapons of survival. They're what your mind deploys when a part of your unconscious threatens to leak into your awareness. Repression, denial, rationalization, projection. You've probably used these today without realizing. Maybe you convinced yourself that you were just tired, when really you were deeply hurt. Maybe you dismissed someone as dramatic, when you were the one feeling out of control. The most chilling part? These defenses don't just lie to others, they lie to you. And over time, the cost of maintaining those lies is anxiety. Anxiety is the signal. It's your mind's alarm system saying, something's off. But most of us never hear it that way. We treat anxiety like the enemy. like a virus to be eradicated. We numb it with distractions, drown it in habits, or blame it on external problems. Yet Freud insisted that if you really want to heal, you have to stop asking, "How do I get rid of my anxiety?" and start asking, "What is my anxiety trying to tell me?" Let's look at a case that captures this perfectly. A man named Daniel, in his early 40s, came to therapy with chronic anxiety and control issues. He couldn't stop obsessing about his kids' schedules, his wife's mood, his finances, even how straight the picture frames were on the wall. At first glance, he seemed like an over-involved father and a slightly neurotic husband. But Freud would have seen something deeper. As the therapy unfolded, it became clear. Daniel wasn't afraid of things going wrong. He was afraid of his own buried rage. As a child, he had grown up with a father who flew into violent rages. Unpredictable, terrifying, explosive. Daniel learned to be the good one, the peacemaker. He silenced his anger so completely that he no longer recognized it. But his unconscious hadn't forgotten. His mind redirected that repressed aggression inward, twisting it into anxiety. His attempts to control the outer world were really attempts to control the inner one, the one filled with rage he never learned how to feel safely. This is the battlefield Freud warned us about. Most of our emotional suffering isn't about current events. It's about the war between what we feel and what we're allowed to feel. And anxiety, that's the fallout. It's what seeps through the cracks when the mind can no longer keep the peace between its conflicting parts. Think about it. How many times have you held it together in public, only to collapse in private? How many times have you said, "I'm fine," when you were anything but? That tension, that disconnection between your public self and your private truth, that's the breeding ground for anxiety. And the more you try to suppress, the more energy your mind has to spend maintaining the illusion. Eventually, it breaks down. Freud's unsettling insight was this. You cannot truly eliminate anxiety unless you're willing to confront the parts of yourself you've buried. And most people never do. They double down on control, on logic, on keeping it together. They build a fortress around their pain and decorate it with productivity, politeness, and perfection. But inside, the conflict rages on. So what does that mean for you? It means that escaping anxiety isn't about fixing your thoughts. It's about listening to them. It means that the panic, the restlessness, the obsessive control, these aren't random. They're signs that something within you is trying to break through. A memory, a feeling, a truth you didn't feel safe enough to hold. Freud believed that healing begins the moment you stop pretending. When you stop lying to yourself about what you feel, who you are, and what you need. But that takes courage. Because to face your unconscious is to face everything you've been avoiding. The grief, the anger, the guilt, the fear. The parts of yourself you swore you'd never show. And the tragedy is, those are the very parts that hold the key to your freedom. So before you reach for another coping mechanism, ask yourself, what if the thing I'm trying to silence is the part of me that needs to speak the most? The battlefield isn't out there. It's inside. And it's time you stopped running from it. At some point, safety becomes a trap. Not the kind built with locks and chains, but the kind lined with routines, predictability, and the avoidance of anything that might cause discomfort. You start believing you're building peace, but really you're building walls. You stop taking risks, stop feeling deeply, and convince yourself it's maturity or wisdom. But deep down, there's a quiet voice asking, why does my life feel smaller? Even though I've done everything right? That's the paradox. Safety, the very thing you crave when you're anxious, becomes the prison that makes anxiety worse. Think about how this plays out in real life. You avoid speaking in meetings because it makes your heart race. So your brain registers, good job, we avoided panic. But now it flags speaking as dangerous. So the next time you even think about speaking, your anxiety spikes. The brain isn't trying to hurt you. It's doing its job, protecting you from what it thinks is a threat. But here's the problem. The more you avoid, the more your brain learns to fear. This is called experiential avoidance, and it's one of the most destructive psychological traps. You avoid a feeling or situation to reduce discomfort in the short term, but the long-term cost is massive. Your world starts shrinking. Your choices get narrower. Your joy gets quieter. And over time, you lose touch with what freedom even felt like. In therapy, people often say, "I just want to feel safe," but safety is a moving target. And when you start organizing your life around avoiding discomfort instead of building resilience to face it, you start to decay in silence. The anxiety doesn't go away, it gets smarter. It hides in socially acceptable behaviors: overachievement, perfectionism, overplanning, saying yes when you mean no, always being the one who has it all together. But let's be honest, underneath that polished exterior is usually a person who's exhausted. Someone who spends more time trying not to fall apart than actually living. And no matter how carefully they build their comfort zone, something always slips through. A panic attack in the middle of a calm day. An intrusive thought while brushing your teeth. A wave of dread on your way to work, even though nothing's wrong. Why does that happen? Because the body remembers what the mind avoids. Every time you suppress a reaction, your nervous system stores it. The tension, the fear, the words you didn't say. Over time, your body becomes a vault of unfelt feelings. And it doesn't matter how many goals you hit or how nice your apartment looks. Your nervous system still thinks you're not safe. Not because of the world. Because of what you won't let yourself feel. Let's look at a real-life case that illustrates this. There's a woman named Sana, a schoolteacher who developed panic attacks out of nowhere. On the surface, her life looked calm. She had a stable job, a peaceful relationship, no major trauma. But her panic was relentless. Tight chest, dizziness, the sense that something terrible was just around the corner. She tried meditation, yoga, and breathing techniques. Nothing worked. Then therapy uncovered the deeper pattern. Sana had spent years avoiding conflict. Not just avoiding fights, but avoiding all intense emotion. Anger, grief, even excitement. Growing up, she learned that staying neutral kept her safe. If she stayed small, calm, and quiet, she wouldn't trigger her emotionally volatile parents. So she perfected emotional self-control. But you can only push things down for so long. Her panic attacks weren't random. They were decades of suppressed emotion trying to surface. She wasn't being punished by her anxiety. Her body was just tired of holding secrets. Once she started facing the emotions she had avoided, letting herself get angry, cry, even scream, something strange happened. Her panic lessened. Not because she fixed her symptoms, but because she stopped trying to be safe all the time. This is the painful truth most people don't want to hear. The need for constant safety often masks a fear of emotional intensity. And the problem with avoiding intensity is that you also avoid aliveness. Passion is intense. Love is intense. Creativity is intense. Even joy can feel overwhelming when you've spent your life staying numb. So here's the question. What would happen if you stopped protecting yourself from everything that might go wrong and started trusting yourself to handle it when it does? Because that's real safety, not the absence of chaos, but the belief that you'll survive it. It's not about deleting anxiety. It's about expanding your tolerance for uncertainty. Think of it like this. Anxiety is a fire alarm. If you try to rip it off the ceiling every time it goes off, you'll live in chaos. But if you learn what sets it off, and how to stay calm while it's blaring, you change your relationship with fear. Of course, this is easier said than done, especially if you grew up in an environment where unpredictability meant danger. If your parents were explosive, emotionally absent, or even just high-strung, you probably learned that control equals survival. So letting go doesn't feel like freedom, it feels like death, like inviting the chaos back in. But that's old fear talking. The child who couldn't speak up or make mistakes isn't running the show anymore. You are. And you're stronger than you think. You'll know you're healing when you start letting yourself take small risks. Speaking a little more honestly. Saying no without over-explaining. Making space for silence. Feeling emotions without trying to fix them. It won't be comfortable. In fact, it might feel worse before it feels better. But that discomfort isn't danger, it's detox. It's your nervous system adjusting to the truth that you don't need to live in defense mode anymore. The paradox of safety is that the more you try to guarantee it, the more fragile you become. And the more you embrace risk, emotional, psychological, relational, the stronger you grow. So maybe stop asking, how can I make life safer? And start asking, how can I become braver? That's where the shift begins. Not in controlling your life, but in reclaiming your ability to respond to it. With presence, with courage, with your whole, messy, beautiful self. And as you begin to loosen the grip, another question will rise to the surface. One you've probably buried for years. What have I been hiding from inside myself? We'll go deeper into that next. There's a part of you you've never truly met. You might catch glimpses of it in your nightmares. You might feel it rise when someone cuts you off in traffic, or when a loved one says something that slices a little too deep. It's the version of you you've spent your entire life managing, avoiding, or denying. Freud had a name for this hidden territory. The shadow. The shadow isn't evil. It's just unconscious. It's made up of all the emotions, impulses, and traits you were taught not to show. The ones that were labeled too much, not nice, or unacceptable. So you buried them. Anger, jealousy, selfishness, grief, lust, insecurity. Not because they weren't real, but because the world around you made it unsafe to express them. Over time, the shadow becomes a psychological landfill, out of sight, out of mind. But here's the truth. Nothing you repress ever really disappears. It waits. It simmers. It grows more distorted the longer it's kept in the dark. And eventually it leaks. Through sarcasm. Through panic. Through depression. Through dreams you can't explain and behaviors you can't control. That's the curse of repression. It doesn't silence your truth. It just finds new ways to scream. Anxiety is often the smoke signal from that hidden fire. It's your unconscious trying to break through. You might think, I'm just nervous, or I'm just sensitive. But often what's really happening is your psyche cracking under the pressure of suppression. Think about it. If you were never allowed to feel anger growing up, then as an adult, even mild frustration can feel dangerous. So your system goes into alarm mode. Not because of the situation, but because of the memory your body holds. That's the thing about shadow material. It's not just repressed feelings. It's repressed energy. And energy doesn't just vanish. It transforms. Sometimes it becomes a projection. You see in others what you can't admit in yourself. You call someone arrogant because deep down, you're ashamed of your own desire to be seen. You judge someone for being dramatic because you've trained yourself to stay emotionally flat. You hate the liar but bend the truth to keep peace. That's how the shadow works. It makes you fight what you fear inside yourself. And the longer you deny it, the more power it gains. You can't heal what you won't admit exists. That's why shadow work is so uncomfortable. Because it requires radical honesty. Not just with others, but with yourself. It means looking in the mirror and asking, what parts of me have I locked away, not because they were wrong, but because they weren't welcomed? One of the most striking examples of shadow repression came from a man named Malik. On paper, he had it all: great job, supportive partner, close friends. But he couldn't stop sabotaging his peace. Every time things were calm, he'd stir up chaos. Pick a fight, binge drink, overwork himself. He wasn't trying to ruin his life. He was trying to stay safe in his discomfort. Because that's what he knew. In therapy, he finally uncovered the shadow he'd spent years avoiding. Deep grief and rage over an abusive childhood. He had become so good at surviving that he never learned how to feel. His anxiety wasn't a flaw, it was the pressure of years of emotional neglect erupting from the inside out. The mind is clever. When it senses danger in your own emotions, it will build an identity to keep them hidden. You'll become the helper, the funny one, the responsible one. But underneath, there's often a well of unfelt pain. Pain that doesn't want to destroy you, it wants to be seen. And when it isn't, it becomes physical symptoms. Chronic fatigue, migraines, panic attacks, emotional numbness. The body speaks when the soul is silenced. Shadow work asks you to listen. Not just when you're calm and collected, but especially when you're messy. When you feel too much. When you say the wrong thing. When you act in ways that confuse even you. That's when the shadow shows up. Not to ruin you, but to return you to wholeness. So how do you begin? Start with the moments that trigger you. The people who irritate you for reasons you can't explain. The thoughts you avoid. The memories that make your stomach twist. Those aren't just emotional glitches, they're clues. Every time your body reacts disproportionately, it's because something old is being poked. And when you find those moments, don't run. Sit with them. Ask, what am I feeling? What am I afraid this means about me? Who taught me this feeling wasn't okay? You'll be shocked at what surfaces. Often, it's not the emotion that's dangerous. It's the story around it. You were never broken for being sad, or angry, or scared. You were just told you had to hide it. But repression comes at a cost. Every part of you that's unloved becomes unlivable. And the longer you deny it, the more disconnected you become. From your body, your relationships, your own instincts. That's why anxiety often comes with disassociation. You don't feel like yourself. You're floating, blank, gone. Because being present would mean being honest. And that can feel terrifying when your whole life has been built on avoiding what's real. But here's the twist. The shadow isn't your enemy. It's your lost self. The you that adapted to survive, but longs to return home. And when you stop fighting it, when you start integrating it, you become more whole, not less. You gain access to emotions you thought were gone. You reconnect to your intuition, your creativity, your vitality. You don't become perfect. You become real. Carl Jung, Freud's one-time student, once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." Shadow work is how you stop mistaking your pain for your personality. It's how you learn that your anxiety isn't a disorder. It's a doorway, a call to explore what lies beneath the masks. So the next time anxiety rises, instead of asking, "How do I get rid of this?" ask, "What part of me have I forgotten?" The answer won't always be pretty, but it will always be yours. And that's the beginning of liberation. In our final chapter, we'll face the hardest truth of all. The only way out is surrender. At some point, the exhaustion becomes undeniable. You've tried it all. The affirmations, the rigid routines, the self-help hacks that promise to make you high-functioning again. But beneath the surface, you feel the weight of holding it all together. Not just your to-do lists or your job or your appearance, but the entire identity you've built just to feel safe. The one who seems calm. The one who's always composed. The one who doesn't need anyone. But that mask is starting to slip, isn't it? Real healing doesn't begin with another attempt to be better. It begins with the terrifying, liberating decision to stop pretending. Not just to others, but to yourself. Because the truth is, you are not okay. You are not fine. You are overwhelmed, disconnected, and scared. And finally allowing yourself to admit that is not weakness. It is the first real act of strength. Carl Jung believed that we don't become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. That means facing the parts of yourself you've disowned. The anger, the sadness, the neediness, the shame. All the traits you've buried under performance and productivity. You don't fix these parts, you listen to them. You let them speak. You sit with them even when they make you cringe. Because until you do, they will control you from the shadows. Most people never reach this point. They spend their entire lives managing symptoms instead of addressing the root. They double down on discipline, productivity, and surface-level coping. They medicate the symptoms and ignore the cries from within. But when you start to realize that anxiety is not the enemy, but a messenger, you begin to relate to it differently. You don't fight it anymore. You ask it what it needs. And often its answer is startlingly simple. To be seen, to be heard, to be allowed. Letting go of the mask doesn't mean you fall apart forever. It means you finally fall into your actual self. The real you, not the one you created to survive, but the one waiting underneath. And this version of you? They're not polished. They're not perfect. But they are real. And realness is what the nervous system has been craving all along. This journey is not clean. It doesn't happen in one breakthrough or during one perfectly lit yoga session. It happens in small moments. The silence you don't fill. The tears you don't choke back. The boundary you hold. The truth you speak, even when your voice shakes. Slowly, these acts of surrender become your new foundation, not because they fix you, but because they connect you to your core. In the end, the scariest thing isn't feeling your feelings. It's realizing how long you've gone without them. Healing is remembering that you were never broken, that you never needed to earn love by being in control, that you were always worthy, messy, unsure, and in progress. So if you've made it this far, maybe this chapter isn't the end. Maybe it's the beginning, the moment you stop trying to heal your anxiety like a problem, and instead begin honoring it like a story. Your story, the one that starts not with perfection, but with presence. Take a deep breath. You can put the mask down now.